Good day, everyone. This is Naval, your OLC for Purposive Communication. Today, we are going to discuss another purpose of communication, and that is for academic purpose. So, we will have two parts for this. So, let's begin. At the end of this module, you're expected to give the meaning of academic communication and recognize the importance of communication towards its purpose. Let's start. What do you mean by academic communication? It is also called as scholarly or scholastic communication. It refers to the methods of communication that are highly structured and generally only used in the pedagogical setting. Well, when we talk about pedagogical setting, it means the school. So the teaching and learning episodes that we had with our teachers, the different transactions that we have with the school personnel, all of this would fall under academic communication. However, when we talk about academic communication, it's also very particular about the relationship we have with the members of the academic institution. So, when we see them outside of school, academic communication would still be activated in a way that we don't converse with them in the same way that we converse with our friends, with our family members. So it's on a different level of formality as well. All right. So now let's move on to the different importance of academic communication. Academic communication is important to ensure that the relationship of teachers, students, administration, and parents are secured towards the aim of producing successful students. So the people mentioned here, the teachers, students, administration, and parents, these are the stakeholders. So what is the common goal? We wanted to produce successful students, successful people in the future who can later be effective citizens of the country. Also, another importance of academic communication is to have meaningful sharing of information, not just inside but also outside the classroom. That's what I've been telling you earlier about the different settings. So, meaning in the school setting, you have the teaching, learning episodes. You also have the different transactions with the other school personnel or academic institution personnel. But then when you go outside, it's a different setting, but the relationship is maintained. That person is a student, and this person is a teacher from that institution. Or if you see as a student of an institution, you see someone and a personnel from your school. So it's on a different way. The way you'll be communicating with them. Yes, you can still establish a meaningful communication with them, but the level of formality stays the same as when you are in school and then you are outside of that setting. All right. So there you have it for the first part. Now we move on to the second part of communication for academic purposes. At the end of this module, you're expected to communicate effectively for academic purposes and demonstrate understanding of how important is communicating academically. Let's start again with the definition of effective communication, just like in the previous lesson. If someone achieves the desired level of objective through communication, we can conclude that it is an effective communication. So effective communication takes place when the receiver of a message, perhaps the students, give a proper response. So sometimes it can also be reflected in the grades of the students. You would know that they understood whatever was shared by the teacher if there was effective communication. So they tend to score better in their exams. But that's not always the case. They may understand the concept, but they may commit an error in some parts when they answer the test. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if they get low scores, effective communication did not take place. But the scores can be one indicator of successful or effective communication. Well, there are other factors that we can consider. So we can also have information needs of the audiences, technical background, cultural background, gender, and knowledge of the subject. So, to achieve effective communication for academic purposes, these are the things that we should consider. Let's take them one by one. Information needs. So, when we talk about information needs, you have to be on the same page. The same goes for technical background. So, information needs. You have to test where the students are at the moment. You have to gauge their level at the moment. So, the lessons should be tailor fit to their level, and it should be explained in a way that will be perceived by them correctly. So we have to assess. As teachers need to assess where the student's current level is. Then we have the technical background. So we have to research for some technical terms and jargons. They have to be identified accordingly so that the students will be able to understand. Cultural background. So we have to teachers should consider the differences in culture for between and among the students. So they already have their different personalities. So their cultural background should also be taken into consideration. For example, this student came from the province or this student came from a different country. It's something you need to consider or the teachers need to consider. Gender. Of course, learning styles. Females have different learning styles than male. So not to consider also, you have to consider also individual differences as well as gender is concerned. Right? So what is effective for males? What did they usually like? What is effective for females? What did they usually like? Okay? So it can be on a generic approach first and then you can do individualized instructions later on as teachers. And then lastly, we have the knowledge of the subject. So this is related with the information needs technical background. All right? So you have to test where the teachers need to test where the students are at the moment. So he or she can design the lessons accordingly to what they need to learn, and what they already know. So they have to assess what they already know, and then from there, he or she or the teachers can design what to add to what they already know. So what they are supposed to learn. And they can also add further what they want to learn. Okay? So that's it when you are to aim for achieving effective communication for academic purposes. These are the things that should be considered as well. Now let's move on to the different reasons why there can be communication failure. So the possibility for communication failure is high, specifically if there is a diversified class, right? So number one that we need to consider is the audience's resistance. Communication failure will most likely happen if the receiver or the audience denied listening or even resisted hearing and perceiving the information. What can be the common causes for this? Number one, they do not have the knowledge of the subject. All right, so they are at a loss. They are not familiar with what you're talking about or the teacher is talking about. So you have to ensure that you have that as a teacher, you do the diagnosis first in order for you to know where the students are at the moment, their current level, and for you to tailor fit the lessons accordingly, or for the teachers to tailor fit the lessons to their level of understanding, and for you to assess also what they need, what they are supposed to learn. Also, it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop with the diagnosis. The teacher should make sure that he or she delivers every learning episode in an enthusiastic manner. All right? So you have to, as a teacher, it is a challenge for them to make lessons interesting and engaging for the students so that they would be participative, they would contribute, and they would be willing to learn. It would add to their motivation. Next, number two, we have communication constraints. So there are a lot of constraints that they can experience. So there can be lack of time, lack of resources, and lack of knowledge on the methods and how to get their messages across. So we further subdivided it into the following. Legal. Both the receiver and sender have an insufficient knowledge about legal terms that create misconception. Right. So if there are some words in the lesson or in the topic which cannot be understood by both the receiver and the sender, it could be a constraint on both ends. So what is the key to resolve this? To do research. Right? So specifically on the end of the teacher, he or she has to do extensive research if ever there are terms, technical terms that need to be explained. So it's the responsibility of the teacher to impart that knowledge to the students. Yes, the students can also do their research, but it is the teacher's call to further explain, further define these technical terms. Next, socioeconomic. So people with different socioeconomic status tend to have different understanding and perception of words. They even have differences when it comes to their own vocabulary or their slang, their lingo. All right? So people from the upper class have a different language or vocabulary with those from the middle class. Okay. So there has to be a compromise between the two or between two groups of different socioeconomic status in order for them to meet halfway. So people from the upper class should talk or should hang out with people from the middle class, and people from the middle class should do the same. They should have an exchange of information like, oh, for us this means like this. Oh, for us naman it means like this. So with that exchange, they will be able to understand one another regardless of the difference in the socioeconomic status. All right, next. Cultural. It is important to know and understand someone else's culture, otherwise it will result in chaos. That's why it is one of the factors to consider as well if you want to achieve effective communication in the academic setting. So it is important to know where they came from, to have their profile, so that you are at least prepared on how to deal with them if you are the teacher. All right? Or as students also, you have to know the nature of the academic institution. Is this a Catholic school, or is this open to foreigners? Do you also accept people from other places? Something like that. So you have to be prepared, or you know what to expect when you go into that institution. Next, institutional. There are norms and other factors in a community that hold people back in speaking their minds, thus creating misconception. So it's about the rules and regulations now. So sometimes there are protocols that we need to follow, and this is limited to an institution and different from one institution to another. So there are certain practices that we need to follow. There are certain rules and regulations that we need to follow. And sometimes these rules, this procedure can be a barrier for for openly expressing people's opinion. So they have to follow a certain procedure, protocol in order for them to voice out their concerns. And sometimes it's something that students are not really open to do. For example, because it's so much of a hassle, it's not worth it to do that. But then if you give them the floor, say an open forum inside the classroom, maybe they could speak their minds. So it's one way to avoid that hesitation from the students. If certain protocols need to be followed and it's causing them, and the students think that it's much of a hassle, then you can provide open forum sessions in the class. All right, and then lastly, we have psychological. If a person is mentally challenged, he or she will be unable to communicate well, thereby leading to communication failure. That's why if there are conditions like this, there are specialized schools as well. Because in specialized schools, the teachers and even the personnel are trained to handle cases like such. So it's not really about discrimination, it's just giving them what they need. And it may not be addressed correctly if you mix them in a common or, yeah, in a regular school. So they need specialized education for their specialized needs. And on our part, if ever there is one in our class, we need to understand them the best way that we can. Then later on, we can further suggest as teachers in that school that they need to receive specialized education. So, to further assist them with what they really need. Okay, so those are the different categories under communication constraints. There you have it. It is very important to learn about academic purposes and in order how we can achieve effective communication in such a setting because we are all students one way or another. It's not only because you are enrolled in a certain institution that you're a student, but also professionals have become students once. And even at their workplace, they can also be students as they have relationships with their mentors in a mentor or in a coach trainee manner. So thank you for listening for today and have a good day.